Have you heard of the High Elves? How about the Dark Elves, Wood Elves and Snow Elves? The short answer to that, I'm sure, is yes, of course you have. Only an NPC would ask such an obvious question. The various races of Mer in the Elder Scrolls are all fascinating in their own unique way. Their creation myths, mixed with their environments, have shaped races that are almost indistinct beyond the Mer categorization and the pointed ears. We've talked about all of them at some point on this channel, but there are a few groups of Mer who tend to fly under the radar. One such group is the Direnni. Chances are, if you know a thing or two about the Bretons, then you know who they are, or were, but there is a lot more about the Direnni Elves that is hardly known to the people of Tamriel. And that is because their once glorious empire gradually declined into insignificance. They were not conquered or routed. In fact, it was the Direnni who humbled other great powers in their prominent years. But all empires fall, and in most cases, the descent is subtle enough that even the Emperor himself cannot see it happening until it's too late to remedy. This is the fate that befell the Direnni Elves of High Rock. Remarkably, they endure in the Fourth Era, but their numbers have dwindled, and their once vast domain now encompasses only the small isle of Balfiera. Though while it may seem a scant spot of land, squeezed between the superpowers of Hammerfell and the High Rock kingdoms, Isle Balfiera is by no means trivial, for it is the home of Tower Zero, Adamantia, the primeval peak of creation. It is where the Aedra assembled to share their ideas for this newborn Nirn. It is where the trickster Lorkhan was finally defeated after the Great Elnathay War. And it may just be the battleground for the ultimate war, a clash of gods that will deliver the mortal realm to apocalypse. Simply put, there is a great deal more to the Direnni than simply being the precursors to the Bretons. Hey guys, it's Drew here and welcome back to Fudge Muppet. There are a few videos exploring the Bretons on the channel, and when discussing their origins, it's impossible not to mention the Direnni Elves. Each time, Thrastus of Elenhir's writings on Direnni breeding habits were cited. In contrast to the Ayleids of Cyrodiil, who brutally enslaved any humans they came into contact with, the Direnni simply conquered their local needs, and then ruled them as a caste of nobility. The aristocratic elves established a system of feudal vassalage over their human subjects, with rights and privileges that included the perquisite of coition with any human they desired. Sex with attractive needs was considered casual recreation, and Direnni nobles competed to have stables of the most desirable human subjects. The inevitable half-elven offspring from these liaisons were not adopted into the families of their Direnni parents, being considered sub-Mer, but were nonetheless often given privileged positions among the subject needs. Over time, this led to the establishment of a recognised caste of mixed-blood humans who were given the name Bretons from the Elnathax Baratu or half. The Breton caste was only allowed to marry humans, so over time their elven blood became more diluted, and the Nedic appearance predominated. Thrastus documents an interesting custom in Direnni society, one which inadvertently led to the rise of a Breton-occupied province of High Rock. This aspect of Direnni culture is relevant for a video devoted to the Direnni Elves, but it is not the only mark they left on Tamriel, so let's delve into the lore of Tamriel's least conspicuous elves. The diverse biomes of Greater Tamriel seem to have a tangible effect on the mortals who inhabit them. The Chimera of Resdayn, for example, developed much of their culture around their environment. Mushroom towers are popular dwellings in the east. Weapons and armour are crafted from the chitin and carapace of the native fauna, and silt striders are the primary means of transportation. The inhospitable nature of Resdayn led the Chimera to associate it with Mehrunes Dagon. The Prince of Destruction tested them with natural disasters like fires, earthquakes and floods. Despite once hailing from Somerset, the Dunmer we see in the Fourth Era are like their Aldmer forebears in Suffolk alone. Aside from topographical differences, cultural schisms also play a role in how these races manifest. For the Chimera, there was the triangled truth of the good Daedra. For the Ayleids, who did not diverge too greatly from the Aldmer physically, their distinct qualities came from their religion. Like the Ultima of Somerset, the Ayleids took immense pride in their architecture. Every structure was built to a standard that would please the gods. But the Ayleids had an obsession for the sacred element of light. The most sublime form of light was starlight, which they collected in their wells and stored in masterfully crafted repositories of cut meteoric glass. This led the Aelids to a profound reverence for the Lady of Luminescence, Meridia. The avian aspect of Auriel is prevalent in their art, architecture and dress. There is even speculation that the more primitive style of Cyrodiil's native bird people influenced these motifs. I hardly need to go into detail about any other elven races. The point is pretty clear that these distinct groups are memorable even when some, like the Aelids, have disappeared from the land they once ruled. This is where the Direnni tend to be overlooked. They reached far from their roots in Somerset in terms of distance, but not in terms of culture. Unlike the jungles of Cyrod and the volcanic activity of Morrowind, High Rock was comparatively welcoming to the settling elves. The Chimer had to contend with vexatious Northmen and the dour dwarves, whereas the Direnni had only primitive needs to put up with. These unsophisticated humans were more akin to resources than rivals. So when the Direnni elves settled Tamriel's northwest, they soon found themselves flourishing, and their achievements were abundant. But how did the Direnni come to inhabit High Rock? Well, the Direnni lineage hails from a city in the northeast of Somerset, named Tiragal, which lies on the banks of the Diren River. While the river's name has since changed to the Chalmers, this river gave the Direnni clan their name. Before Tiragal was a prominent citadel, it was a meagre farming village. But this small clan had an aptitude for raising visionaries and innovators. The first of these distinguished Direnni to be documented was Asliel Direnni. Back in these humble early days, the Direnni clan were not noteworthy among the Ultima. They tended to their crops along the river Diren and kept to themselves. Asliel was unique not because his land was vast or prosperous. In fact, it was quite the opposite. His soil was stony, loamless, and too acidic for most crops. Only the most unfavourable weeds and herbs found the barren earth favourable. Some of these herbs could hold value when sold as seasoning for meals, but as you can imagine, spicing up a supper was nowhere near as important to the common cast as simply having supper. This may seem like rotten luck for Asliel, and that's because it was, but sometimes necessity facilitates ingenuity. Prior to now, alchemy was not unheard of. Mixing ingredients to cure ailments, relieve pain, or reinvigorate the mind and body was commonplace. However, it was not an art or a science. It was superstition and oral tradition. Asliel Direnni focused all of his time and energy on making use of his mostly worthless crops, and survival was quite the motivator. He learned for himself the exact formula for combining black lichen and rue brush to create a cure for all manners of poison, and the amount of willow anther to crush and mix with chokeweed to cure diseases. There were few much greater threats in Tiragal in those peaceful days than disease or accidental poisonings. Asliel developed a reputation for brewing all manner of concoctions, and some of these had effects that have actually been lost to time. One such example is when his niece was suffering from some unknown affliction. Every morning, no matter how well she slept, she grew physically weaker. Her face was gaunt, her skin pale, and she was constantly lightheaded. Asliel gave her a bitter-tasting drink, and the next morning, ashes were found all around her bed. A vampire had been feeding on the poor girl, but Asliel's potion had turned her very blood into poison, without harming her in the least. Another even more impressive tale of his exploits features a tribe of savages called the Lokvar, who began raiding along the Diren River. Asliel's measly little herb farm would never be targeted, so he told his fellow Direnni to join him in his lab. Asliel used vampire dust in a way that before now was completely unheard of. He distilled invisibility potions, which allowed the Direnni to fend off the Vikings. When they eventually discovered the source of these spectral defenders, the Lokvar kidnapped Asliel and tortured him until he shared the secrets of his invisibility potion. But the clever alchemist lied and showed the Lokvar how to make an invisibility poison. The Lokvar forced Asliel to test the mixture, but Asliel had been chewing black lichen and rue brush, immunizing himself to the poison. This harmless alchemist became a local legend, and the absence of raiders allowed the city of Tiragal to prosper. Asliel would never participate in the exodus to the mainland of Tamriel, for his expertise had piqued the interest of the Sigic Order. It was Direnni Cygnus, nicknamed the Swan of Tiragal, who would be accredited for leading the Direnni people to their new homeland in the north. Unfortunately, as with most of the remaining notable Direnni, all we know about this journey, and Cygnus herself, comes from a single line in a text titled Once, which lists the names of some famous Direnni figures. While it's likely that Cygnus alone did not guide the Direnni like Prophet Veloth guided the Chimera, Cygnus's name was immortalised because it was she who first spotted Isle Balfiera and the Adamantine Tower, the landmark that would become the pinnacle of their civilization. A significant part of the Direnni legacy was undoubtedly Asliel's alchemical advancement, but this is not the only Magicka-related field that saw breakthroughs thanks to the inventiveness of the Direnni Elves. There was also Raven Direnni, who rose to prominence in the early First Era. Her rules of Eldritch Binding supposedly revolutionised the art of enchanting. Prior to her research, every enchantment was varied and unpredictable, and 19 out of 20 attempts to enchant resulted in failure. The efforts of Asliel and Raven are impressive, but the next pair of Direnni were the first to delve into a previously unheard of field of magic. Not only did they pioneer this kind of sorcery, but they put themselves in grave danger, as this untrodden ground was dark and perilous. The wizards I speak of were Corvus and Kalani Direnni. Since the foundation of the Mages Guild, making arcane academics accessible to the general populace of Tamriel, the schools of magic have become fairly well established and well understood. But before Vanus Galerion decided to bring magic into the mainstream, it was carried out by a select few, and as mortals were coming to grips with the potential of Magicka, there was an enormous amount of responsibility on wizards. A mage in the 4th Era can study a spell tome and learn the precise specifications for casting a contained yet lethal fireball. But imagine the dangers faced by the vanguard of magical study. There were no guidelines, no warnings or guarantees. If you were entrusted with furthering mortal understanding of a new spell or kind of magic, you could quite easily be killed, and that wouldn't even be the worst fate. What if you unleashed horrors not meant for the mortal world? The weight of that liability must have been daunting. Now, with that in mind, let's consider the trepidation Corvus and Kalani Direnni must have experienced when leading the academic pursuit into conjuration magic. These elven wizards did not limit their endeavours to the familiar, to the worldly. They wrenched open the maws of the Padamaic beast, gazed into the gaping darkness of the void, and saw the black dilated eyes of chaos staring back at them. Long before, in the Merethic times, the Oldma had been familiar with the Aedra and Daedra. Azura, Boethia and Mephala guided the Chimera. Trinomac turned Malakath, watched over his loyal Orsama, and the ancestors of the High Elves held fast to Auriel and his Aedric acolytes. But in the first few centuries of the First Era, the mythic elements of Mundus had begun to fade. The early mortal societies were left to unravel the mysteries of their realm and their existence. The Direnni Elves who spearheaded the study of conjuration were dedicated to this cause. According to the text, The Origins of Conjuration, Imperial mages have arguably advanced the study of conjuration magic far more than most, but it first fell to elven wizards to crack open the door to Oblivion without its screaming horrors spilling uncontrollably into Mundus. Corvus and Kalani Direnni and their clan first lit the torch and peered into this unholy darkness, lighting the path for the magical school of conjuration. Their precise binding chants are still used to this day when summoning Lesser Daedra. Non-belligerent Atronachs offered something of a boon to Clan Direnni, acting as protectors and occasionally servants or familiars. Even the naturally mischievous imp was easily coerced into behaving. But one can always count on the natural curiosity and almost calamitous pomposity of the elves, who swung the door open still farther, a door to the Daedric plains that became impossibly difficult to shut. Late into the First Era, Direnni acolytes first attempted to cajole enfrallment from Greater Daedra. Although the most skillful of conjurers succeeded reasonably against these chaotic agents, some elves were weak, and the portal to Oblivion can now never be completely sealed. Subsequent catastrophic confrontations with Daedric princes turned our lands to turmoil. Thus, it falls to every mage in Cyrodiil to actively dissuade traffic with the Greater Daedra in the strongest possible manner. Communion with them is strictly forbidden. We have great members of House Direnni pioneering the development of 3 different schools of magic. We have decorated explorers like Cygnus, who found the single most important historical site on Nirn, the Adamantine Tower. But we also have great warlords like Raven Direnni's cousins, Aidan and Ryan Direnni, who led the elves against the might of the Elysian Empire at the Battle of Glenumbria Moors. Ryan outlawed the Elysian doctrines in High Rock, while Aidan led the armies. Raven used powerful enchantments to augment their strength, and the men of Cyrodiil were defeated. The long-term effects of this conflict would not bode well for either side, however, but we'll touch more on that soon. Apart from these famous elves, little else is truly understood with regards to the Direnni. There are tales told of other great Mer, like Peregrine Direnni, who drove an entire Regatta flotilla back to Sentinel by merging her very will with the waves of the Iliac Bay. There's Peladil Direnni, who in a single day built Black Rose Prison from the scattered rubble of Lilmafit ruins by summoning an army of stone Atronachs. Medora Direnni gained notoriety as the court sorceress to King Lysandus of Daggerfall, centuries later in the late Third Era. But since the conclusion of the Battle of Glenumbria Moors in First Era 482, what we know about the Direnni has gradually faded into legend. The Direnni won a Pyrrhic victory, and it proved to be the beginning of the end for the once great Elysian Order. But unfortunately, it was a costly war, and combined with their ambition and insufficient birth rates, the Direnni were doomed to fall. High Rock is a huge province, and the Direnni, just like their High Elven siblings in Somerset, did not reproduce nearly enough to populate and control every corner of it. Instead, their indulgence in breeding with Nedic vassals and the subsequent production of Breton offspring meant that they were soon outnumbered, and pure Direnni blood became a scarce commodity. So, the Direnni pedigree retreated to the hub of their civilization, where Cygnus first spied the greatest wonder of the world, Isle Balfiera. What remains to be discussed revolves around this tiny island and its ancient exalted nucleus. The Direnni Tower, a pristine pillar soaring hundreds of feet into the air, is the oldest structure in Tamriel by far. Its construction has been dated to Malefic Era 2500, the first year after the dawn. But in truth, it is probably older still, as it is said it was built by the gods. The Tower upon which the convention was held. It is the sole footprint of the Aedra upon the mortal world, a reminder that gods once walked this land. You'd think the Adamantine Tower would be examined meticulously. You'd have thought scholars, architects and archaeologists across Tamriel would uncover every detail about it, for it could provide answers to life's most pressing metaphysical questions. Yet somehow, we know next to nothing about this hallowed monolith. This is the final secret of the Direnni. They may only inhabit a minuscule piece of Tamriel, but it is arguably the most valuable and sacred spot of charted land on Nirn. It is commonly called Direnni Tower, but this title is misleading. The Direnni occupy the tower. They built fortifications around it to ensure that no one else could enter it, but the Direnni only found it, and no mortal race could ever hope to recreate it. All we can gather about the Adamantine Tower comes from a few sources, the first of which being the Orbic Enigma. The spike of Adamantia and its zero stone dictated the structure of reality in its orbic vicinity, defining for the Earthbones their story or nature within the unfolding of the dragon's time-bound tale. Another text comes from a curious builder named Hrym at the Bard's College of Solitude. In his musings on the tower he writes, "It rises stark and sheer from the high centre of Balfiera Island in the Iliac Bay, where it has stood since the dawn of time itself. Adamantine Tower it is called, for the unknown, ageless material from which it is built, and Tower Zero as the edifice that predates all other buildings on Mundus. The Direnni High Elves have ruled Balfiera since the beginning of the First Era. In common parlance, the tower bears their name, though they can claim only the construction of the more recent keep that clusters around the tower's base. Who is responsible for delving the catacombs beneath the keep is a matter of debate with no definitive consensus. What secrets did they find there? What have they concealed to this day? Whatever the secrets may be, the Direnni didn't reveal them to this humble Nord architect. However, secrets there must be, for I took sight and angle measurements of the Direnni Tower from the 8 points of the compass. According to my calculations, and given the known characteristics of all available materials, building an edifice of its proportions should not be possible. Hrym's expert appraisal could only be carried out at a distance, and he found himself with countless questions and no answers. That is undoubtedly the intent of the Direnni, who have deliberately guarded whatever they found within the tower. But as with all intelligence, nothing secret ever remains secret forever, and there are rumours of what goes on beneath the tower, stories of an eldritch artifact of immeasurable power. Beradalmo the Signifier, a scholar and historian of all things elven, shed some light on the rituals carried out by the Direnni on their secluded isle. The reliability of his claims is impossible to quantify without questioning him, but he writes as if he has first-hand experience. Yes, we were great once, but no matter what our individual achievements, every Direnni since Cygnus has been eaten from within by failure, because we cannot solve the mystery of the Zero Stone, and use it to open the argent aperture which it wards. At maturity, every Direnni of high blood is brought into the tower, conducted to the Foundation Vault, and shown the Zero Stone. We are allowed to touch it, once, so as to feel the transcendent mystical power that courses through it, a power we have never been able to tap. And we are shown the argent aperture in the adjacent metallic wall, that door with its lock of 13 slowly counter-rotating rings, a portal we have never been able to open. Perhaps Beradolmo is one of the Direnni Elves, and has been permitted to share the deepest secrets of his kin with the outside world. Or perhaps he's simply a storyteller, speculating on the unknown. But if what he says is true, then the Direnni may possess powers beyond the comprehension of their neighbours, and their tiny, seemingly insignificant island may just be the crux of Tamriel, the pivotal point of the arena where the gods clashed in the Dawn times. Their secrets have been kept for millennia, but some powers are too profound to be concealed forever. In the Fourth Era, Tamriel has become a battleground for competing factions, and these ceaseless conflicts could just converge on the Iliac Bay in the near future. Will the Elder Scrolls VI see the Direnni emerge from the shores of Isle Balfiera? And will the secrets of the Zero Stone spill out from the vaults of the Adamantine Tower? Those questions will have to remain unanswered, for now. Thanks so much for watching, guys. My name's Drew, you've been watching Fudge Muppet, and I'll see you in the next one.